The 12th World Championship round will take place at Hockenheimring for the German Grand Prix. With uncertainty over the mass damper ban, everyone feared for the team's competitiveness. Renault before this race. The French team tried to push for the use of this device, having received the green light from the stewards to use it at the German Grand Prix. But the Fédération Internationale de l'Automobile appealed its own steward's decision. Technically, Renault could use the mass damper, but if the appeal favored the motorsport governing body, Renault would be disqualified from that Grand Prix. So, with all the regret in the world, they decided to voluntarily remove the mass damper from the car, since they didn't want to risk getting a good result and then end up being disqualified later, when the appeal was resolved. Unfortunately for them, that weekend showed what they'd suffer from then on. They qualified 5th with Fisichella and 7th with Fernando Alonso, then finished 5th and 6th in the race. Ferrari returned to 1st and 2nd, led by Michael Schumacher, who with this result now controlled his own championship fate. If they won everything from now on, and with the issue of the mass damper, Renault had much more to worry about, with a Ferrari that was going to come after them now being a very competitive car, and without the advantage they had since late 2025. The next round of the World Championship would be at the Hungaroring in Hungary, where Renault's mission would be to hold on and try to maintain their points advantage, and for Ferrari to push like crazy, trying to make up that difference in the standings. Even in earlier sessions, things became chaotic, with surprises affecting both contenders for the crown. First, Fernando Alonso, who during practice and in a moment of anger, brake-tested Robert Dombos for getting in his way on one of his laps, something he didn't like at all, to the Fédération Internationale de l'Automobile, and they gave him 2 penalties, one for this action and the other for overtaking under yellow flags. The thing is that Schumacher wouldn't be spared either, and would also be penalized, since during the qualifying session, a red flag was issued. On his way to the pit lane, the Kaiser overtook Robert Kubica and Fernando Alonso. So Schumacher would also be punished for breaking the Fédération Internationale de l'Automobile sporting regulations. This meant that the German would start in 11th place and Nano in 15th, extending this Grand Prix. They had to stage a comeback on a very challenging circuit. Pole position would go to Kimi Räikkönen, but this race was looking really good because the rain had made an appearance, and with that, the Grand Prix would become much more difficult on an extremely challenging track. And what we were about to witness would be 70 laps of one of the most incredible spectacles seen that season, and probably one of the most exciting in Formula One. Fernando Alonso gained several spots in one lap, passing Felipe Massa to reach 6th place, while the Kaiser was in 4th. At the end of this first lap, it had been a very impressive charge in this opening lap, but the recovery of both drivers wasn't going to end there, because a lap later, Alonso would overtake Giancarlo Fisichella. At the start of this Grand Prix, it quickly became a direct head-to-head between title contenders Michael Schumacher and Fernando Alonso. But the pace of the Asturian was insane, and he quickly ended up glued to the Kaiser's rear wing, starting to pressure him in an attempt to take the position away from him. Alonso was all over the German driver, but he wasn't making the overtake easy for him, knowing that he had to stop him, no matter the cost, if he wanted to make up the points difference that existed up to that moment. But seeing the pace both of them had, it seemed that the overtake was only a matter of time. Until on lap number 3, the Asturian saw the opportunity and launched himself like a madman against the Kaiser. With this crazy move, Fernando Alonso snatched 4th place from Michael Schumacher. But with the pace he had, it was clear that sooner or later, despite having started in 15th position, Nano would have the chance to win that race. Well, by lap number 6, Fernando was already 12 seconds behind the leader, but he had already pulled 8 seconds ahead of Michael Schumacher, where the Kaiser's pace was completely gone, to the point that Fisichella soon caught up to his rear wing, also threatening to take that position from him. Schumacher resisted the Italian driver's attack for several laps. But if the Grand Prix was going badly for him, on lap 17, things were about to get much worse. Giancarlo overtakes the Kaiser in turn 1, but Schumacher attempts a switchback on the counter steer. He loses control and hits his front wing on the Italian driver's right rear tire. So he breaks the wing and is forced to pit a lap later, which made the Grand Prix much worse for him, right at the very start. Unlike Fernando Alonso, who thanks to his pace, was already fighting for a spot on the winner's podium. The leaders pitted later, while Alonso stayed out after 24 laps without stopping. When he entered the pit lane, he would lose positions, but soon luck shifted slightly in favor of the Spanish driver. Kimi Raikkonen, the race's virtual leader. In a strange turn, he crashed into Vitantonio Lussi's pink bull, causing a violent accident that ended his race, and causing the appearance of the safety car. This was ideal for Fernando Alonso, who used the safety car to pit and emerge as the Hungarian Grand Prix leader. After rejoining the track, when the race resumed, nothing seemed able to stop Fernando Alonso from victory, which, considering where Schumacher was, would be extremely important for his hopes of winning the championship at the end of the season, while Schumacher, well, his problems wouldn't end there. Alonso had in his hands the chance to put the drivers' championship fight in check. Near the end of the race, a new challenger appeared and threatened his victory. That rival, Jensen Alexander Lyons Butt, drove for Honda and started the race in 14th. Because of an engine change, there was a 10-place penalty. Thanks to an aggressive strategy, he moved up to second and pressured Fernando Alonso for several laps as his car ran on less fuel. He had to pit much earlier than when Fernando Alonso made his final stop. According to the strategy, it seemed unlikely he could lead the Grand Prix, especially if Fernando Alonso was running many more laps with less fuel in the car, and with 24 laps to go, he comes into the pits to refuel but doesn't change any of the tires. Noticing the track was drying, it was likely some teams would gamble on dry tires, and this could make the end of the race very complicated for the British driver. Fernando had only one pit stop left and would come in with 19 laps to go. But thanks to the fact that he did change all 4 tires, as well as refuel, Jensen Button took the Grand Prix lead, putting him in a stronger position to finish. Carrera had dry tires, with a track that was drying out, against the worn intermediates that Jensen Button still had. But even though the race still looked very good for him, despite having dropped to second place, luck would turn its back on him. The same luck that had helped Fernando Alonso a few laps earlier after leaving the pit. Fernando's car was sliding everywhere due to a problem. He was unable to keep the racing line, and for a moment it seemed impossible for him to get those dry tires up to temperature on the wet track. Until all the work he had been doing went to hell in a single moment. During the pit stop, the right rear wheel nut came off as Fernando left the pit lane, causing the Asturian's accident. After leading this Grand Prix, following an incredible comeback, he ended up leaving with 0 points due to a pit stop error, completely ruining a race that could have been a game changer for his title hopes, which left the way clear for Jensen Button to win the race. Most importantly, another great chance for Schumacher to close the gap in the standings. Only that the German would have a tough time, since he had to score points. He decided to keep the intermediates and not change tires until the race ended. For a moment, it looked like he could do it as he ran in podium positions. But most of the drivers behind him had already switched to dry tires and were flying on the track. So, without much trouble, Pedro de la Rosa, also on dry tires, caught up and, after a few failed tries, overtook him for second place. He was about to achieve his best ever result in a Formula 1 race. It became clear the Kaiser struggled to keep the car on track and defend against drivers with dry tires. And after the attack from Pedro de la Rosa, it was Nick Heidfeld who went after the position, and he would end up attacking him at the chicane of turn number 6. Though the Kaiser tried to defend by cutting the chicane, that brief contact ultimately proved costly for the Germans' hopes. That brief contact was crucial for the Kaiser's race. His front suspension was damaged, forcing him to retire from the race with 3 laps remaining. But thanks to all the laps he completed, and especially to all the retirements that happened at the back of the field, despite his retirement, he managed to classify at the end of the race and score a point for the drivers' standings. But obviously they would feel it was little compared to the chance to get a better reward with a risky strategy. For a moment, he was in podium positions, but suddenly a great haul of points turned into just 1 point scored. But this didn't matter much to Jenson Butler. After 6 seasons in Formula 1, seeing how victory slipped away from him in different ways. When lap 70 arrived, after a majestic race on his part, he ended up taking his first victory in Formula 1 and the first and only victory for Honda in its entire racing history. Pedro de la Rosa, replacing Juan Pablo Montoya, would also have his moment of honor. Nick Heffel finished second and stood on the winner's podium for the first and only time in his Formula 1 career, marking his best result and closing out the podium in one of the most chaotic races of the 2000s. And it saw the first victory of a driver who, although he didn't know it at the time, would later become the Formula 1 world champion. Ferrari and Schumacher failed to exploit Renault and Alonso's issues. This Grand Prix felt like a missed chance to close the points gap with just 5 races left. And those points that were lost in this Grand Prix, could they easily be worth the Formula 1 World Championships they were chasing so hard? Ferrari knew they could beat Renault and Fernando, but to win the titles, they had to be nearly perfect for the rest of the season. And so, and only then, would there be a chance to finish the season, which seemed completely lost, with the championships. Beginning of the same 5 rounds dethroned the champions, and the next duel was set for Istanbul Park in Turkey, the track that had debuted in 2005 in Formula 1, which was ready to kick off the season finale, with open battles between France and Italy and Germany and Spain. That weekend began well for Ferrari, as Felipe Massa secured pole position for the Grand Prix, which would in fact be the first of his Formula 1 career, but it left Schumacher in second place and Fernando in third, ready for the two of them to battle again, as had been the trend throughout this entire season. And this set up 3 pretty interesting battles for this race. Schumacher looking to cut more points from Fernando Alonso, the Asturian fighting to defend his lead, and Felipe Massa battling to get his first victory in Formula 1. Each had his own mission for this showdown, but it was unclear who would achieve his goal and win the Turkish Grand Prix. There would be a lot of aggression at the start, but miraculously, Schumacher manages to defend second place, while Massa was comfortably leading the race. The team achieved its initial goal. Then, we focused on pace to secure a 1-2 finish, which seemed very likely at that point in the race. And so the first laps of this Grand Prix began, with Massa pulling away by almost 10 seconds from Fernando Alonso and 3 from Schumacher. At the start, with a lot of pace from the Brazilian driver, Schumacher began to push to try to catch up to Felipe Massa. Alonso was struggling to keep up with the leaders, making this an ideal start for the Italian team. Unfortunately, despite their strong start, things soon got complicated for the Italian team when, on lap 3, Antonio Luzzi from Toro Rosso had to be avoided. He spun out in turn 1. Since he was stranded on the track with a stalled engine and couldn't rejoin the Grand Prix, a safety car was deployed to remove him. But this was a problem for Ferrari, because everyone was going to take advantage and make their first pit stops. The thing is, by this point in the Grand Prix, Massa led Michael Schumacher by just 2.5 seconds, while Alonso trailed both by 10 seconds. Since they were entering the pit lane together, Schumacher would get stuck behind the Brazilian driver's stop. And with all the time that was going to be lost, this situation was going to be a complete gift of position to Fernando Alonso. This was significant, as Schumacher now had to overtake Fernando on track to take crucial points in this battle. When the safety car left, Alonso accelerated to escape the Kaiser, while Massa controlled the race. Meanwhile, Schumacher couldn't challenge the Asturian driver. And the rest of the 58 laps of the Turkish Grand Prix were spent watching Schumacher chase Fernando Alonso, seeking a chance to overtake. But with the problem that the Kaiser during this part of the race ended up falling far behind the Spaniard's pace. After this first pit stop, there was quite a gap between the Renault driver and the Ferrari driver. For now, Alonso could hold off his title rival. It was after the second pit stop, and it wasn't until the last 15 laps of this race that Schumacher was back within reach of Nando, regaining his pace. This gave him 15 laps to attempt a win. But the scenario we saw in Imola was going to repeat itself here. Alonso managed to withstand Michael Schumacher's attack despite Schumacher's incredible pace, not giving him any space or the opportunity to throw the car in a maneuver that could be risky. Schumacher's desperation grew as, less than a second behind, he couldn't make a clear move for the position. Once again, as was typical that season, we saw another defensive masterclass. This time, Fernando was in control, holding on to a valuable position. As the final lap arrived, Schumacher was taking his last chance to capture second place and close the points gap. In a battle that Alonso and the Kaiser fought to the final meters of the Turkish Grand Prix. Alonso held off 15 laps of relentless attacks from the Kaiser to defend that second place and add 8 more points to his tally. His feat was very important and valuable. But let's not forget that the winner of the race, achieving his first victory in Formula 1, was Felipe Massa, the dominator of Istanbul Park and the Turkish Grand Prix. Though the Brazilian won, Alonso and Schumacher got the attention, because those 2 extra points scored by Fernando could mean, with 4 rounds to go, the World Drivers' Championship, although that was something we would only know at the end of the season. Meanwhile, Michael Schumacher had lost another consecutive chance to close the gap to his rival. Meanwhile, the 2006 season was nearing its end. It was time for Ferrari to race at home again in the final European event before the season's last stretch. But obviously, with the fight on edge, nerves running high, and the rivalry escalating, controversies would soon return to this battle, especially for the Italian Grand Prix. And as expected, the Ferraris were very strong. However, the poleman would be Kimi Raikkonen from McLaren, who would beat Michael Schumacher by just 0.02 of a second. Meanwhile, Fernando had qualified in 5th position, but his last 3 laps of the qualifying session were completely deleted. The reason? Well, with 8 minutes left in Q3, Alonso had a tire blowout. He had to pit, change tires, and then try to improve his times at the last minute. But this fast lap coincided with Felipe Massa's own fast lap. At that moment, there was a wide gap between the drivers. But Ferrari ended up complaining to the International Automobile Federation that Alonso didn't move out of the way. During Felipe Massa's fast lap, he slowed him down, hurting his chances for a better result. After this accusation, Renault tried to defend Alonso, saying that on this circuit, most of the time, drivers try to avoid traffic while also seeking a slipstream from the car ahead, and that the distance between Felipe Massa and Fernando Alonso was completely manageable and that there was no intention from Fernando to block him. For their part, in response to the complaint, the Fédération Internationale de l'Automobile had to investigate this situation, and although the federation understood that it was not a deliberate action by Fernando, they still found him responsible for blocking Felipe Massa. He ruined his final qualifying lap. As a result, the Spanish driver was penalized by losing his last 3 qualifying laps and starting from 5th position. Now he would have to start from 10th at the Tifosi's temple. Of course, Renault called the penalty a real joke, and the fans accused the Fédération Internationale de l'Automobile of doing this to benefit Scuderia, Ferrari and Michael Schumacher on his hunting ground. I don't even have to tell you how upset Alonso was with this decision. In the middle of a Renault team press conference, without mincing words, he told the media that after this, he would never consider Formula 1 a sport again. Fernando Alonso's race didn't improve. He regained some positions, but his engine failed just a few laps from the finish. And this time, unlike what had happened in the last few Grand Prix, it would be fully taken advantage of by Schumacher, who would go on to win that race. With the 10 points from the win and Fernando Alonso's retirement after being in the season at some point, 25 points behind the Spanish driver, the difference between them was only 2 points in the drivers' standings. Luck favored Schumacher at the temple, the Tifosi, and he won before his home crowd. It was the opportunity he had been asking for and needed to get back into the fight for the title. And with 3 races left to finish the season, and what about the issue with the Mazda Amper ban? Now they were the ones with the fastest car on the grid. And that 8th title for Kaiser and the 14th Constructors' title for Ferrari were there for the taking. They depended only on themselves to become world champions. With the battle so close between both teams, it became a direct duel between Miguel Schumacher and Fernando Alonso, and Ferrari Renault for the crown and the title of King of Formula 1. However, this victory by Schumacher, racing in red in front of the team's fans, who gave him 5 driver titles without many knowing, would be Michael Schumacher's last. At the press conference after winning the Italian Grand Prix, The German officially announced his retirement from Formula One, saying that after talks with the team, he decided to step away. After a long Formula One career that began in 1991 and was set to end after the 2006 season. So these would be his last races dressed in red. And obviously he would want to say goodbye by giving Ferrari one more constructors crown and to say farewell to Formula One. As an 8-time World Drivers' Champion, only 3 races would decide the titles of this season. Alonso led the table with 108 points, while Schumacher was second with 106 points. Ferrari led the constructors' table with 168 points, while Renault had 165. So any mistake at this point, especially in the season, could definitely kill the chances of glory for any of the contenders. The third to last World Championship round will be at Shanghai circuit in China, promising to keep spectators on edge. Amid the drivers' and constructors' title battles, it was time to wrap up the season and the fight. What would happen? Another crown for the most successful Formula One driver at that time? Or the 2-time championship of a rising talent who was clinging tooth and nail to the crown he had won a year earlier in this category? And the qualifying for this race would be a wet spectacle, which, as always, are the kind of conditions that separate the boys from the men. Renault capitalized fully, securing first and second with Alonso on pole and extending the Chinese Grand Prix lead. For their part, Ferrari had a terrible qualifying, with Schumacher only in 6th and Felipe Massa having to start at the back of the grid due to an engine failure and a full penalty for changing it. At this point, Renault seemed poised to regain control, with an impressive battle looming on the horizon. Not even the rain would want to miss it, since this Grand Prix would start on a wet track and with rain ready to turn this competition upside down. The ball was in Renault's court. They had to capitalize on the great qualifying they had achieved, and for that, it was necessary to reach the finish line first. At the end of the 56 laps of the Chinese Grand Prix, Renault survives the first few meters and defends the leading positions. Against a Schumacher who couldn't move up places, getting stuck behind Rubens Barrichello from Honda, who slowed him down during the first laps of this race. After 6 laps, Alonso was nearly 20 seconds ahead of Schumacher. So, lap by lap and minute by minute, Ferrari's driver's chances of winning looked more difficult by lap 7, right? He got past his former teammate and by lap 13 overtook Jenson Button to move into 4th place. And once the pace stabilized, Schumacher was able to get to work and try to close the gap with the leaders. At this point, he trailed the lead, dominated by Alonso, by 25 seconds. So obviously, there was still a lot of work left to do for the Kaiser. He also benefited when Kimi Rai, who was second with Enkiba, retired from the race due to a car reliability issue. But at this particular point in the race, it had stopped raining, and while Schumacher's pace increased, the Renault's pace started to drop drastically. The Michelin tires that the French team was using were struggling a lot in these conditions, while the Bridgestone tires that Ferrari had were holding up much better, the shift from wet to dry track. This let Michael Schumacher close in on Giancarlo Fisichella, who was struggling with his intermediate tires. Giancarlo was trying to withstand the attack from the Ferrari man, and every lap that he managed to keep the red car behind him. It would be time that would allow Alonso to hold on until they had to switch from intermediate to dry tires, and that would completely secure him the victory. Realizing he couldn't pass Giancarlo, Schumacher is the first of the 3 to pit with 35 laps left. But even though the track was drying, it still wasn't ready for dry tires, and Schumacher decided not to change his tires and only refuel. This would clearly prompt a response from the French team's pit. Alonso would need to pit next lap, but with Schumacher's lead. His tires were too worn out and he didn't think they would last until the second round of pit stops. So when he came in, he only changed the 2 front tires, thinking that would be enough to hold on until the track dried. Unaware at that moment, they had made a serious strategic mistake. Doing this because only changing the 2 front tires made the car even harder to handle for Fernando Alonso. Schumacher and Fischke kept the same tires. They would close the gap with the Spanish driver, and the 20 seconds between Alonso, Fischke and Schumacher would disappear, giving the German driver a chance to win. Alonso wasn't able to hold on at all with those tires, and with such a dramatic loss of time, his teammate and his rival immediately got right behind him and he was unable to resist. Fischke, Fischke ends up attacking him at the end of the long straight, leaving Alonso in second place. And this meant that once again in the season, it became a direct duel between Schumacher and Alonso, at least for second place in this race, but where the Ferrari driver's overtake seemed imminent, while Alonso would try to hold on until he could switch to dry tires. But there was little he could do, because as soon as the German saw the opportunity, he went straight for his position. With this move, Schumacher was already in second place. Victory in this Grand Prix now seemed to be a battle between Giancarlo and Michael, as Alonso dramatically kept losing pace. But don't worry, things were about to get even worse for the Spanish driver. Well, in those laps after the overtake, the track already had a dry line, and this made several teams decide to gamble on switching to the dry tire. Alonso and Renault tried it before the Ferrari team did, looking to regain the position they had lost on track. But during the pit stop, a problem with the right rear wheel nut turned the stop into a 19-second one. This eliminated him from victory contention, leaving only Schumacher and Fischke. Schumacher pits on lap 40 expecting the Renault driver to switch to dry tires. Renault obviously has to respond a lap later to try to maintain the lead. Giancarlo pits, and when he rejoins the track, it seemed that Renault managed to win this round, but the one who ends up winning is Michael Schumacher. With fully heated tires, the Kaiser charges into turn 1 and overtakes Giancarlo Fisichella for first place. This proved crucial, as that move secured his Grand Prix victory. He stopped Alonso, who was closing in, from threatening his victory. Despite the disaster, Fernando managed to reclaim second place from Fischke, but the damage was already completely done, because by lap 56, Schumacher achieved his 91st victory, 2 more points to his tally. Now, the 2006 World Drivers' Championship battle was tied at 116 points, and for the first time in the year, Schumacher was the leader of the World Drivers' Championship standings. The World Championships were extremely close with only 2 races to go. Now, even a small mistake could decide this battle and the season's champions. The second to last round would be at Suzuka, the Japanese temple where Schumacher won his first Ferrari championship in 2000. If he wins here, he'll be in a strong position to secure his long-awaited 8th Drivers' Championship. Despite having lost the lead in the championship, and despite the points gap between him and his closest pursuer melting away, Alonso still trusted his car's speed and believed a second championship was possible, but he was running out of options. Well, what if Schumacher won that Grand Prix again and he finished second? Even if the championship came down to the final race, he couldn't win the title on his own and needed to win and move on. He needed to enter the year's final round with an advantage, but Ferrari was confident and understood the race's importance. They secured a 1-2 in qualifying, with Felipe Massa on pole. Meanwhile, Schumacher would be second and Fernando Alonso ended up starting in 5th position. In a not at all favorable start to the weekend for the Spanish driver, the championship was starting to look red for him no matter how you looked at it. But as they say, races have to be run and anything can happen during them. Neither Schumacher nor Alonso, as well as Ferrari and Renault, were practically fighting for their championship at the legendary Japanese temple of Suzuka.
53 laps, the Japanese Grand Prix begins now. Massa on the right, Schumacher on the left. Watch out for Alonso. Did he get a good start? Schumacher moves over Mike Rouse, and both Schumacher and Michael block him into turn 1. Alonso is in.
The Ferraris held their ground, keeping the Toyotas from passing at the Grand Prix start, while Alonso gained 1 position. But obviously, the 4th place he had at that moment was not enough. Considering that Schumacher was behind Felipe Massa in 2nd position, but a couple of laps later, Schumacher overtakes Felipe Massa basically because he lets him pass on the straight. The Grand Prix leader was the German driver, who needed that win to nearly secure the World Drivers' Championship. So if the Grand Prix ended like this, Alonso would be in serious trouble. And while Schumacher was trying to pull away at the front, Alonso was having trouble, unable to get past Ralf Schumacher's Toyota. Alonso urgently needed to overtake the Kaiser's brother if he wanted to have even the slightest chance of winning this Grand Prix. Lap after lap he applied pressure, but couldn't find a gap to overtake on a track where this maneuver is very difficult. Finally, on lap 12, he seized an opportunity and acted without hesitation on the Japanese circuit's main straight. With this, Alonso was now in 3rd place, but he had lost a lot of time behind the Toyota, approximately 5 seconds. But without the blockage it represented, the German driver could use his speed to try catching the Ferraris late in the race. On that same lap, as he overtakes, Felipe Massa pits for his first stop. Now with a lighter car, Alonso aimed to extend his stint to gain an advantage at the pit stop. To take 2nd place from the Brazilian driver, Felipe Massa got stuck in traffic behind a BMW. This would be a huge help to Fernando Alonso in his mission to keep extending his pit stop and try to come out in second position for the lap 15. It was time for Fernando's pit stop. He had managed to extend his stop about 3 laps longer than Felipe. Knowing that if he wanted even the slightest chance to win this race, he had to come out of the pit lane ahead of the Brazilian driver.
It shows how exciting this championship has been.
The move worked out perfectly for Renault, who virtually already had second place in the competition. Still, they had to pursue Michael Schumacher. Meanwhile, Felipe's race was ruined behind Nick Heidfeld's BMW. Watching Fernando pull away each lap, unable to pass the German driver. For his part, Schumacher would pit on lap 18, managing to come out ahead of Fernando Alonso, and with a good advantage in his favor. Fernando's World Championship hopes relied on catching and overtaking Michael Schumacher in the final 35 laps of the Grand Prix. The German controlled the pace, preventing Fernando from closing in and maintaining a safe 3 to 5 second gap. No matter how hard Alonso tried, he couldn't get closer. And as the time for the second and final round of pit stops approached, his chances of winning the race looked very slim. Schumacher was doing a great job, completely controlling the race, which was about to give him the decisive match point for his 8th driver's title. With 18 laps remaining, Schumacher had it that lap, and Alonso wasn't closing the 5-second gap. He stops in the pits for his final stop, and after rejoining the track, he ends up doing so ahead of the Asturian driver. So, with 18 laps to go, 90% of the job was done. He only needed to finish 17 laps to leave with a 2-point lead over Fernando Alonso. He was practically already touching the Formula One Drivers' World Championship. But in that same lap, where everything seemed won for Michael Schumacher, the miracle from Asturias appeared. Schumacher has an engine failure and goes from comfortably leading. Now he was out of the Grand Prix and eliminated from the Japanese Grand Prix, handing it over on a silver platter. Not just the Grand Prix lead to Fernando Alonso, but likely the 2006 Drivers' Championship too. An engine failure he hadn't experienced since the 2000 French Grand Prix. He nearly left Schumacher without the crown the year he announced his Formula One retirement. So now the tables had turned, and Alonso just had to win that Grand Prix and the championship would be 90% his. And when lap 53 arrived, El Nano won after Michael Schumacher retired. And with that result, Renault also returned to the top of the Constructors' Championship at a moment when they put Scuderia, Ferrari, and Michael Schumacher in checkmate. This victory left a 10-point difference between Alonso and the Kaiser in the drivers' standings and a 9-point difference between the French team and the Italian team. So, in order to become world champion, Schumacher needed to win the Brazilian Grand Prix, and Fernando Alonso had to retire, since that was the only result that would allow him to become world champion. In this scenario, Brazil would host the deciding races for both the Drivers' and Constructors' Championships. Schumacher, needing a miracle to achieve it, Alonso simply needed to get 1 point to secure a second championship that had seemed very difficult for him in the last few races. Obviously, things weren't looking good for Scuderia Ferrari, but they say that when things are bad, they can always get much worse. And bad luck had struck the German driver, as in Q3, his last qualifying session dressed in red. A fuel pressure failure kept him from setting any time. So no matter what he did, he was going to end up starting 10th in that race. So if we said that before arriving at this Grand Prix he needed a miracle to become world champion, now he needed a damn impossible mission or complete divine intervention to end up taking that crown. Felipe Massa took pole position for his home Grand Prix, starting alongside Fernando Alonso IV, knowing that this result would give him the driver's title, but needing to move up a few positions to try to give Renault the constructor's title. The race showed that Schumacher and Alonso's final battle was a quest for a miracle. In 71 laps at Interlagos in São Paulo, we would discover the 2026 World Drivers' Champion and top team. The start of the race ended up being quite calm. Massa led comfortably, while Alonso avoided getting into trouble. Schumacher for his part started aggressive. At Curva del Lago, he overtook both BMW drivers in one move, gaining several positions. By the end of that lap, he would overtake his brother Ralph to move up to 7th place. On the back straight, he passed Barrichello's Honda and gained 5 places in 2 laps. And now, with the two Renault drivers ahead of him, he was aiming, if he couldn't win the race, at least to give Ferrari another constructor's title. However, a safety car triggered by Nico Rosberg's accident halted the German's charge. But once it left, Schumacher would continue his fight, now trying to beat the Renault of Giancarlo Fisichella. And although the pace was very strong, bad luck kept tapping the shoulder of the one who was going to retire at the end of that race. Fisichella doesn't make the overtake easy, and by pushing the braking to the limit, he ends up brushing Schumacher's left rear tire with his wing, with enough force to cause a cut and completely ruin his race. With this, Schumacher's slim chances at the Drivers' Championship were nearly gone, and the Constructors' title was at high risk. If they couldn't win it, then Felipe Massa's victory alone wouldn't be enough for the Italian team. With the result Renault was getting at that moment, Schumacher managed to reach the pit and get back out on the same lap. Although this puncture meant the end of his dream of an 8th driver's title, life was offering him a final chance to stage a heroic comeback and fight for his team until the last lap of the Brazilian Grand Prix. From then on, Schumacher pushed his car to the limit, making the charge of his life. With 35 laps remaining, he had already climbed to 10th place. And once he caught up to the group of cars that had left him behind because of the puncture, it was time for Michael Schumacher's final show. The Kaiser had managed to get back into the points at this stage of the race, and Alonso was in second place, having overtaken Kimi Raikkonen. He focused on finishing with the car, knowing that would secure the title and return to the Kaiser. After several laps, he closed in on Giancarlo Fisichella again. What if he overtook him and advanced a few more positions in the standings? Besides, if something happened to him or to Fernando Alonso, Ferrari could still aim for the Constructors' Championship, so Giancarlo was obliged to stop him, but Schumacher would get his revenge for what had happened. At the start of the race, with 9 laps left, the German took 5th, causing the Renault driver to make a mistake. But he had one more goal before the end of this Grand Prix. Kimi Raikkonen, and here we would see the last great battle of the Kaiser, dressed in red, with a Raikkonen who would be his replacement the following year at Ferrari. But for now, he was going to defend tooth and nail what was the 4th place in that race. With 6 laps to go, the German was right behind the Finn, wanting to finish that comeback at least in that 4th position. When it was time to attack, Raikkonen blocked a furious Kaiser in his farewell race. And with 3 laps to go, his last great moment arrives. Dressed in red, Schumacher launched himself in a move of pure pride and courage, in what could be his last maneuver in Formula 1, which ends with a beautiful overtake, which unfortunately only served for him to say goodbye to the category in style. Since this result was not enough to give Ferrari the Constructors' title, much less to win the Drivers' Championship. Bad luck showed up at the worst moment for Kaiser. 3 situations in 2 races kept him from what could have been his 8th crown. But his fighting spirit never left him. Even when all seemed lost, he kept giving his all until his last lap in his final Grand Prix as a Ferrari driver. Meanwhile, Alonso, for his part, was about to close out a memorable season. Dominance defined the first part, but the mass damper issue changed everything. He was there, delivering impressive races and holding his own with a car that handled much differently than the beast from earlier in the year. And even so, he withstood the onslaught from the Ferrari men, almost leaving Renault, but giving them a 2nd driver's crown and a 2nd constructor's crown. On lap 71, Felipe Massa achieved this dream by winning in front of his home crowd, while Fernando Alonso finished 2nd. And with this, the Spanish driver became the world champion of the 2006 season and a 2-time Formula 1 world champion. The final lap of the Brazilian Grand Prix concluded one of the greatest Formula 1 battles of this century. What did he see? How Ferrari and Schumacher came close to the glory of a comeback and turning around both the Drivers' and Constructors' Championships. But the reliability failure destroyed any chance of glory. And the winners ended up being Fernando Alonso, who withstood the onslaught and never gave up in this battle. Renault, despite the ban on their secret weapon, managed to hold on and win their 2nd Formula 1 World Championship. In, as I told you, one of the most memorable years that the category has given us. The last great battle between the Kaiser and Fernando Alonso was a head-to-head duel that was decided in the final race of the year in a rivalry remembered to this day. that of a rising talent like Fernando Alonso and a retiring legend like Michael Schumacher. They gave their all to win that crown and reach motorsport's highest glory. But where, as always, only one can be world champion, and that ended up being the one from Asturias, Spain. But unfortunately, after this great battle and this intense confrontation in Formula One, life would not bring the same fortune to either of the two involved in this rivalry. As Schumacher announced at the Italian Grand Prix, he retired from Formula One. He only did it temporarily, returning in 2010 with Mercedes as they rejoined Formula One after leaving in the 1950s. But his return wasn't what many expected, since he had trouble adapting to his new car. His pace was never as explosive as in his prime. He retired from Formula One again in 2012 with his only podium that season at the European Grand Prix, subtitled Jay and Coil. Unfortunately, after a skiing accident with his family, Schumacher suffered a serious health condition, from which, to this day, in December 2025, absolutely nothing is known. And he has not been seen publicly again after that horrible accident during his family vacation. Ferrari replaced Schumacher with Kimi Raikkonen, taking advantage of McLaren's internal issues. In the 2007 season and all the scandals of that year, they managed to take both the Constructors' and Drivers' Championship crowns. A year later, they won the Constructors' Championship but lost the Drivers' title on the final corner of the last lap at the year's last Grand Prix at Interlagos in Brazil. Since November 2nd, 2008, Ferrari hasn't won a championship in 17 years. Many seasons have passed since Ferrari's last title, and one way or another, they have ended up losing in many of the opportunities that life has given them. Since that distant season of their last glory, when Fernando Alonso won his second world championship, and as it was written, since the end of 2005 he ended up going to drive for the McLaren team. But from here on, things were never easy for the Asturian driver. In 2007, he had many internal conflicts with his team during his rivalry with Lewis Hamilton. Plus all the media scandal about spiking, and between that and the already bad relationship with the team, he ended up leaving McLaren to return to Renault and later signed with Ferrari. In 2010, where he had the chance to fight for that third championship twice. But he ended up failing in every attempt to achieve it at the hands of the all-powerful Red Bull, led and commanded by Sebastian Vettel. He later returned to McLaren for one of his worst periods when the partnership with Honda engines started. Life hasn't smiled on Nano again to give him the chance to drive a competitive car. He retired from Formula One in 2018 but returned in 2021 to pursue a third championship and is still competing. But Aston Martin is running out of time to give him a competitive car for one last fight. Subscribe to follow his 20-year quest for a prize. Renault was never as competitive in Formula One as it was during its golden years in 2005 and 2006. And they have gone through periods of competitiveness, selling their team and returning to the category. And nowadays, they've even given up their status as a constructor to become a customer team, which has simply made this brand throw away what was once a historic legacy as engine manufacturers. It's incredible that they've never been able to match what they achieved in those 2 seasons when they rose as world champions. But even though luck hasn't smiled on any of those involved in this fight, it doesn't take away from the fact that it was one of the best battles of the modern era of Formula One. And an extremely exciting season, one with a fierce duel that kept us on the edge of our seats throughout the entire competitive year. And without a doubt, the great battle delivered by Renault and Ferrari, led by Schumacher and Alonso. It's a historic season in every way, which quickly became a memorable battle between two automotive giants facing off with a living legend of Formula One and a young man brimming with talent, giving every drop of sweat to avoid surrendering the throne to a king seeking his final glory before farewell. Ultimately, this battle was settled in the final races of 2006. It will always be remembered, not only as one of the great rivalries in Formula One, but also as one of the best seasons ever seen in Formula One. Ladies and gentlemen, this concludes Chapter 5 of Historic Formula One Seasons. But this is where I ask you, did you have the chance to witness this battle live? Who were you supporting in 2006? And tell me if you were Team Fernando Alonso or Team Michael Schumacher in the fight for the driver's title that season. Let me know all your opinions in the comments section. With nothing more to add, I say goodbye by telling you that if you like this video, give us a thumbs up, subscribe to this channel, turn on notifications so you know when I'm uploading a new video, and share this with your friends as well. So, I invite you to follow us on these Instagram and Twitter accounts, the link to which will be in the description of this video. And I'll see you soon for more historic Formula 1 campaigns. Thank you for tuning in. See you later.